Morning, everyone. You're very, very welcome to this beautiful venue here in the Epic Museum in Dublin. For those of you that don't know, my name is Derval MacDonald, and it is my privilege to be with you here this morning for Achieving a Sustainable Future for All. Thank you to all of you who've turned out in such good numbers here in person, and also to all of those of you who are joining us online, and we hope to hear from you later on. This is a really special Real Talk event, which has been organised in collaboration with Coca-Cola and the Institute for International and European Affairs, who have worked with many times before. Real Talk is a forum where industry, consumer groups, NGOs, campaigners and government are all coming together to discuss how society can drive the development of a fully circular economy and develop more sustainable packaging. By the end of this year, I think there will be 15 Real Talk forums that will be held all across Europe. Events have already taken place in the UK, in Germany, France and Austria. So now it's our turn here in Ireland to drive a really, really brilliant conversation. Later on, I'm going to be moderating a fantastic panel discussion. We're bringing together a range of exciting speakers from different backgrounds and perspectives who are going to exchange their ideas and focus on how Ireland can meet its climate targets, especially in the wake of COP27. We want you to be part of that discussion, so if you're here in the room, we're going to have a roving mic, so make sure that you have some good questions. And also, if you're joining us virtually, if you just put your questions in the Zoom chat function, we'd love to hear from you. The aim of that panel discussion is to provide a robust, a frank and an honest policy-led conversation on how we can collectively shift the focus from sustainability targets to actual achievements, to accelerate the journey to net zero and to ultimately help the government meet its climate targets. You'll be hearing from me a little bit later on for the panel, but first of all, to give some introductory remarks and to introduce our keynote speakers, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to David O'Sullivan, Director General of the IIEA. Thanks a million, David.
Thank you very much, Derval, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you here on behalf of the IIEA, and I want to thank Coca-Cola in particular for their sponsorship of this event this morning and helping us shape this extremely important discussion. I'd particularly like to thank our great panelists, and particularly the Minister, Minister Calleary, for joining us as our keynote speaker, taking time from we know his very demanding schedule at the end of the year for all politicians. And I want to thank all our panelists, and of course, Derval, who I know will be a great MC. We've worked with her in the past, and I know she will help the panelists organise and structure their discussion in the best way possible. Many people today will say it, but let me say it first or second after Derval. This is a crucial conversation. We talk about many challenges that we face, and I was discussing briefly with the Minister. We still have the horrific Russian war in Ukraine, many other events which demand our attention, but we cannot lose sight of this bigger picture of the existential threat to the planet which climate change represents, and frankly the behavioural change that we all have to make in order to address that. And it's going to require some of us to unlearn the habits of many years and change our way of doing things in order to meet this challenge. And so that's why this is such an important conversation, to get the key stakeholders together: politicians, policymakers, business, NGOs, stakeholders, to get ordinary people engaged in this conversation. So this is a really important occasion, and I'd now like to give the floor to Agnese Filippi, who's country manager of Coca-Cola. And thank you very much, and I look forward to a great discussion. Thank you. Agnese.
Thank you so much, David, and good morning, everyone. My name is Agnese Filippi, and I'm Italian, maybe you got from my pronunciation, and it's really my great pleasure to be with all of you today. First of all, I want really to thank you, Minister of State for Trade Promotion, Digital and Company Regulation, Minister Dara Calleary. Thank you for taking time today with us. And a really big warm welcome to our panelists. We will have today with us Luis from Coca-Cola Ireland. We have Suzanne from Food Cloud. We have Kiva from CI Group. And we have for sure the Senator John McGowan. Thank you so much, guys. This is a very important moment for us, very important, because it's a great opportunity to be here together, to reflect for a while, try to understand how we can really protect our planet, how we can achieve our circular economy strategy set by government, and so ultimately, how we can together create a more sustainable future for our beloved Ireland. This is the reason why we are here today. And at Coca-Cola Company, at the end, our environmental, social, and governance goals and action are really connected profoundly with our purpose. Our purpose is very simple. We are here to create a more sustainable future for our business, for our community, and for our planet. And it's true, guys, at the end, we know that we are a global beverage company with a strong presence here in Ireland. And we know very well, and we feel the responsibility to be here and to help this kind of conversation. Because only like that we can really work together to make the packaging waste a problem of the past. And we believe that the circular economy is the way, the best way, the most impactful way to create and to address this challenge, but also it's the best way to achieve the objective of the government climate action plan. So this is really, in a nutshell, the reason why we are here today together. And we want to do our part. Together with Coca-Cola Ireland and North of Ireland, we are working really relentlessly together to realize our vision that is a world without waste. What we want to do, we want to help to collect and recycle a bottle or a can for each one we sell by 2030. And to do that, there is a lot of work to be done because you need to follow, you need to innovate every single step of the life cycle of our packaging. From the moment that we think about the design of a package to a moment where we need to think about how to collect, where we go and how we recycle, and finally how we repurpose the packaging as well. And do you think that if we do alone, we are able really to solve it, to follow every single step? That's really where the partnership is becoming really crucial in order to succeed. So as we look really, every one of us, we are strengthening our effort in the wake of COP27. We want the net zero by 2040. And across Coca-Cola system, we can do that only if we work with others. We can do alone. It's impossible. No one company, no one industry, no one is able to reach this kind of target alone. And even if it could be an individual, a single target that we give to ourselves, but if it is also objective that the government is committing at national level, it's clear that we can do alone. And this is also a simple reason why we are all together today. Because what we want to do is to gather all the stakeholders together, working together in the best way possible, because my problem is your problem, is the problem of everyone. And together we need to co-create solutions for a shared sustainability challenges that we have in front of us. It's very relevant and very important. So to do that, I know that there are many conversations happening around. But why we are here, why we have this real talk? Because as a company, we have this mantra, we bridge divides as a brand. And we want really to bring all the stakeholders here together and to create a really honest conversation, honest debate, collecting really all the beautiful minds around, starting from NGO, government, industry, campaigner, in order to be sure that together, collectively, we create a solution for the future. This Real Talk is one of the 15 forums that we are holding in Europe, and it's very important to stay together here because we want really to turn from ambition to achievement to action. We want to unlock the power of partnership, creating an unstoppable wave of positive change in front of us. So I'm really confident that we can make it. And you know, I'm Italian, and I live now in Dublin. It's 1 year, more or less, yes, here in Dublin. And I learned one thing when I arrived, the sense of community. Here there is a strong sense of community. And this sense of come together, to be each other back, is something that is really special in this country. And so I'm sure, 100%, that we can create this transformational journey to bring a more sustainable future for our beloved Ireland. Saying that, I really wish you a beautiful session today, and I invite the Minister, Dara Calleri, for a few words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agnes, David, Dervla, to my colleague, Senator John McGahan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you here in EPIC today and to have the opportunity to address this issue. And I want to thank David and his team in the Institute of International European Affairs and to our colleagues at Coca-Cola Ireland for organising this Real Talk event, which, as Agnes said, is one of 15 events across the continent. And I think it's so important that we take time to come together and address the issues of sustainability and supporting and enticing businesses to come on that journey to a net zero future. I want to acknowledge David and his team in the IIEA as one of our leading think tanks here and one of the leading institutions to give us the space and the time to reflect on these issues. The IIEA has provided a much needed and a very valuable forum and a platform to discussing public policy across a range of important issues, and has, through its history, often been the organisation to set the challenges that you're setting here today. So I'd like to thank you and your team. And to Agnes and your team in Coca-Cola Ireland, I want to acknowledge that I think it's 70 years since Coke arrived in Ireland to do business here. I want to acknowledge that and commend you and your team, and also to acknowledge your work in promoting sustainability. And I know you have a target as an organisation to reach net zero emissions by 2040. And that's something we all want to see you achieve. I think everybody in this room knows and understands that there's now a significant focus being placed by consumers, by retailers, by business, by staff on the sustainability of the products that we all consume and that we all produce. And that is evident in our shopping aisles, it's evident in the boardroom, and it is evident on the markets. It is influencing corporate strategy, management structure, and the core activities of most types of businesses. It's a job seekers market in Ireland and in many other parts of the globe at the moment. And talented job seekers want to work for organisations that share their values and contribute positively to a local and global economy. And I've been struck in the last number of months since I took up this role by companies who are in the recruitment market at the moment who are being challenged by those who they seek to recruit on what that company's policy and sustainability and emissions is. There is a social and regulatory necessity on business today that they be good corporate citizens, that they contribute proactively to the values that are important to society, and that is vital to our society and is vital to our future. Many companies are seeking to differentiate themselves on the basis of responsibility to the environment and to climate change by developing their own sustainability reporting. But for consistency and to support this effort to adapt such reporting, we need to put in place regulatory reforms and guidance. The European Union has a strong tradition in environmental and societal legislation. Unsurprisingly, it has been leading the way globally in climate change and sustainability matters by way of strategies such as the EU Green Deal and the Sustainable Finance Agenda. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, known as the CSRD, is one of the measures detailed in the EU's Green Deal. It places the performance of companies on environmental, social and governance matters on an equal footing with their financial performance. This is a significant change on how companies are publicly accountable for their impact on people and the environment. And to ensure companies in Ireland are prepared, I will be convening a stakeholder forum early next year to update and give guidance on the next steps on the CSRD. It is also obvious that today's linear model, which is based around take, make, waste, is environmentally and economically unsustainable. We need, as Agnes has referred to, a new circular model of production and consumption. Circularity basically means using our resources carefully and sustainably. It means getting the design right. It means using and producing things that are durable, products that can be repaired and reused, and after a long life can be dismantled and recycled into equally valuable products. A circular economy reduces material use. We can redesign materials to be less resource intensive, and we can recapture waste as a resource to manufacture new materials and new products. In a circular economy, we move away from the model of managing and disposing of waste towards one of preserving resources. At a national level, our programme for government acknowledges this and recognises that Ireland needs to establish a circular economy to help achieve our climate ambitions. Our Waste Action Plan for a Circular Economy, which was published in 2020, reaffirms the link between the circular economy and climate action and mandates a whole-of-government approach to ensure a successful transition to that circular economy. The Circular Economy Strategy, published last December, just a year ago, provides our national policy framework for our transition to the circular economy. The Circular Economy Act was then enacted last July, and that places that strategy and that government commitment on a clear statutory and legislative footing. Work is ongoing at a European level to make sustainable products the norm via the extension of the eco-design regime to cover a wider group of products and additional sustainability criteria. The proposal will also introduce a digital product passport that will improve transparency and make relevant information available to repairers, to enforcement authorities and to consumers. And this in turn will help consumers to understand the environmental impact of the products that they use, that they buy, and to allow them to move towards greener choices. As part of our commitment to circularity, with the help of producers, retailers and organisations, a deposit return scheme is being, I won't say introduced, but I'd say reintroduced. And anybody that was a child of the 70s and the 80s, like me, will remember that that was the norm when we were growing up, that you brought your bottle back, you got 10 pence, I think at the time, and off you went and reused it again. So we're going back to the future. And, you know, we will, establishing the scheme at the moment, it'll be up and running by 2024. And it shows a practical way and a relatively simple way to changing our daily behaviour. It is rewarding people for doing so, but that is necessary too. Sustainability means many things to different people. And there are people who will attach many meanings to sustainability to maybe prove their own agendas. For me, at its core, I think sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising our ability to meet our needs in the future and meet the needs of future generations. With that in mind, decarbonising business is key to Ireland's future competitiveness and the long-term health of not just of our economy, but of our society. The link between fossil fuels and economic progress has to be broken completely. The circular economy business models, alongside our renewable energy strategies and regenerating our natural biodiversity, are imperatives not just for society but for enterprise too. Tackling climate change is the defining global challenge of this decade and of the next decade. And that challenge gets lost as crises blow up and move on, but that has to be kept front and central of all of our activity. This transition to a low-carbon economy requires the concerted and united effort of society, of government, of business, and of every single citizen. Under sectoral emission ceilings announced last summer, the enterprise sector is mandated to reduce manufacturing emissions by 35% by 2030. And it's a sector that didn't get the kind of coverage that others did when these were published, but I just want to reflect on that. That is a major revolution in the way we do business and we do manufacturing. And it will call for a major change in the way we produce, the way we consume, the way we design goods and services that we use on a daily basis in our economy. We are finalising the next iteration of the Climate Action Plan as we speak, and it will be published before Christmas. It will set out actions for government, for business, for society, and it will identify the carbon abatement potential that's going to be closely aligned to specific sectoral climate targets, including enterprise. Our department has been closely involved in this process, reflecting our department's responsibility for both our own sectoral emission ceilings for industry and for built environment emissions, and also reflecting the significant implications for business across a range of sectoral measures, such as those in energy, transport, and in agriculture. And in order to help manufacturing reduce their emissions and reach those targets, we are investing €55 million under the National Recovery and Resilience Plan through the Green Transition Fund. This fund facilitates cost-saving investments that reduce carbon emissions by incentivising the installation of energy metering systems and also investments in low-carbon, energy-efficient equipment and processes such as industrial-scale electric heat pumps. For those businesses, and particularly those smaller businesses still looking at how to get started on this path, the Climate Toolkit for Business is a very useful tool developed by our colleagues that will assist SMEs to start that journey towards lower emissions, improved energy efficiency, and towards greater business responsibility. The Climate Toolkit for Business is a free online carbon calculator which will allow SMEs to input very simple information to get an estimate of their own carbon footprint. The toolkit then uses that information to generate a personalised action plan for each business, offering a tailored list of the relevant schemes that are available specifically for them. Many companies now are focused on bringing their costs down, and ultimately this means a move away from fossil fuels and a move towards more sustainable, cheaper alternatives. There are many opportunities for Ireland in this transition to a low-carbon economy. It provides several opportunities to grow our economy sustainably, to generate new, high-quality employment opportunities in every region across the country. Large-scale deployment of renewable energy, both through onshore and offshore wind, and also solar energy, will help to provide both energy security and lower costs to business and to consumers. The capital costs of renewable energy have fallen significantly recently and are continuing to fall, and that will make it a much more valuable proposition for a business. Wind energy will be critical in enabling our transition to a low-carbon economy. Meeting our national climate targets will require a significant increase in the deployment rates of renewable electricity, including offshore wind, compared to those achieved in our history. Achieving the full potential of Ireland's offshore wind resources offers major opportunities for the development of offshore wind electricity and also the associated byproducts such as hydrogen, ammonia, energy storage and transmission technologies and technology services. To conclude and to reflect on the theme of today's event, partnership will be the central delivery mechanism for achieving this more sustainable future. Government is well aware that we must lead and that we must put in place the conditions to allow business and to allow citizens make more sustainable decisions and investments. But government alone cannot and will not solve this multifaceted challenge that we face. We will rely on the innovation, on the determination and the shared values from business as well as society and the allocation of capital from financial markets. We will have to work closely in partnership to achieve these aims. This event today and its partner events across Europe are an important signal on the part of business towards this shared ambition. And I hope we will continue to explore the partnerships needed to deliver on our firm promise to better protect this planet that we share. It is ambitious. There will be challenges, of that I have no doubt, but it is the job of responsible government and responsible business to seek growth, sustainable growth over the long term and to ensure that we can successfully and cohesively navigate this transition. If we do that, we will build a greener, more sustainable and more prosperous Ireland. I want to thank Coke for again inviting me here today. I understand the Coca-Cola truck is in town, so that only means one thing, it's that time of year. And I think I want to join in wishing everybody a very happy and sustainable Christmas. I regret that I cannot wait for the panel, but I do look forward to hearing the discussions, and I will leave you in the good hands of my good friend and colleague Senator John McGahan to reflect the government view. But I wish this event every success. I think the real talk sounds like a brand name, but this is what we need in this space. We need some real talk and very honest conversations, but more importantly, we need some real action.
Thank you very, very much, Minister. And I know that you will try and stay for as long as you can, but if we don't get a chance, thank you very, very much. And thank you also, Agnese, for your opening remarks, and also to David at IIEA for this collaboration. It is time now for what Agnese described as the beautiful minds. We're going to introduce you to our panellists who are going to lead out on a really fantastic conversation. Just on that, just what the Minister was talking about, how partnership is really going to be the central delivery mechanism. I'm going to invite our panellists, as you know, Senator John McGahon, Fine Gael spokesperson for Climate Action, Communications, Energy and National Resources. We're also joined by Louise Sullivan, Head of Packaging Recovery at the Coca-Cola Hellenic Bottling Company, Kiva Donnelly, Sustainability Lead at CIE Group, and please give a warm welcome also to Suzanne Delaney, who is the Development Director at Food Cloud. Now, we had actually hoped to be joined this morning by Aoibhinn O'Brien, who's the co-founder of Food Cloud, but COVID sadly is still with us, and although Aoibhinn doesn't have it, it has hit her household, and she thought it was best not to attend in person this morning, but we're delighted to have you here with us, Suzanne. So look, let's get straight into it, because as we've heard from everyone this morning, sustainability, climate is really the biggest economic and social imperative of our time. And we want to explore this morning how well industry and consumers are doing on their own climate action journeys. I'm wondering who I should pick on first. And Louise, I might start with you, because we heard from Agnese a very, very ambitious target for 2030. Just talk it through us again, because as Agnese said, it's not a simple thing.
No, it certainly isn't, Derval. And, you know, so you mentioned the targets that we have, and in the context of what the Minister mentioned earlier, packaging collection agenda. You know, obviously packaging is a huge part of our business. It's a huge part of our emissions. It's about, in Ireland, is about 50% of the emissions that we produce. So it's probably not surprising that we have a set of commitments and a set of ambitious commitments to try and look at how we can make that packaging more sustainable.
And so it's to recycle the equivalent of every can or a bottle by 2030. That's not too far out.
That's it. Well, back in 2018, this target was set on a global level. Very ambitious target to recycle, collect and recycle a bottle and can for everyone that we produce. So not too far away, but also what we did in the bottling arm of Coca-Cola HBC, who I work for, we set an interim target in 2025 to reach 75%. So that, and in terms of where we are in Ireland, we actually are not doing too badly towards that interim target. Through Repack, who is our producer responsibility organisation here in Ireland, and we're very involved with, we deliver 73% collection in Ireland. And that's broken down by different packaging types. So plastic, I think, is in the headlines quite a lot. And, maybe it's unsurprising to hear that it's under-indexing. It's about 66% for plastic collection or PET collection in Ireland. We collect much higher rates of glass, about 88%, and about 74% on aluminium cans. So where we are right now, overall, we're not too far away from our 2025 target, but there's a huge gap to get us from 73% where we are now up towards that 100%. And also not forgetting that actually we have regulatory targets to meet for PET collection, 90% by 2029 under the single-use plastic.
So what are the enablers that you need to try and reach those national targets?
Well, look, we were very, very happy to see the government actually take action on deposit return systems. It's a system that we very much support. We have experience of deposit return systems across Europe, and we see that consistently. Deposit return systems are a reliable way to deliver very high rates of collection. And we believe that that would be a very key enabler to get us towards that 90% collection that we need to meet as part of the Single-Use Plastics Directive. But also it helps us from a corporate perspective because it gets us much closer to that 100% collection goal that we need to reach by 2030.
It was really interesting to listen to Agnese talk about it. It's like the life cycle of the product, like from the very beginning design right through. Kiva, the transport sector also has ambitious targets to reduce those emissions to, it's about close to half by 2030. Transport is such a huge, huge part of it. What steps are you taking, or how far along on the journey are you at CIE?
Yeah, well, we actually have a really interesting future ahead of us. As the Minister said, you know, in terms of sectoral budgets, we have to reduce emissions in the transport sector by 50%, and public transport is obviously, you know, a key plays a key role in doing that. So we're actually on a journey of expanding our services. We pre-COVID had 300 million passengers per annum, and we're back to that now. And actually, you know, to 2040, our population will expand to 6 million. So we have to expand our services.
Already the National Development Plan is changing in light of
fast, reliable, quality services, and that's very much central to our plan. But at the same time, we have to reach our emission targets, and that they are mandatory and set in legislation. So
that's a big challenge, you know. Bigger population, but still having to reach those targets.
Yeah. So obviously we have DART Plus, which is enormous investment in light rail, which will see 80% of journeys electrified by 2027, which is not far off. And then there's electrification of Dublin Bus, and likewise for Bus Éireann, urban, and we also see an important role for hydrogen in terms of decarbonising long distance, both potentially rail, but definitely bus.
When we think of CIE, you think of transport and it's everybody on the move, but actually kind of what's perhaps maybe not fully appreciated is the extent of the land banks that you have. I mean, what is the future use of that, or how do you see you deploying that?
You know, in order to really make public transport accessible, and also to help deliver national development plan and urban compact growth, we are one of the biggest landholders in the country, and we have key sites around, you know, rail stations across nationally, Houston Station, Colbert, you know, Kent Station, you know, in all the major cities. And we have a plan to redevelop those in what is called transport-orientated development, which is attractive, accessible, high-quality areas of both residential, commercial, retail, and also one that it protects biodiversity and enriches biodiversity, and is very accessible to micro-mobility and walking and cycling. So that's that's one of our major pillars in terms of our sustainable journey.
Stan, when I think of Food Cloud, and it's, you know, such a young company still, but at the beginning it was all about the tech, and then it's sort of the next iteration was all about the hubs. But where is Food Cloud now in its own sustainability journey?
Well, sustainability has always been at the heart of everything that we do. And I mean, I guess for us, we can't do it alone. So partnerships would be the key for us. And looking at partnerships, naturally, the first piece would be looking at food industry partners. Where do we go with those, and how do we bring those along on the journey? So the first point of that was, I suppose, it started with the tech. And then from that tech, it's sort of like, well, how do we build trust with the food industry? So the first thing was like, actually, okay, there was the safety issue of food, and making sure that, you know, that the journey of food was transparent. So, you know, that brought food industry partners along. And then the second piece then, I suppose, once we brought food industry partners along the journey, then it's sort of looking at the data to make sure, well, actually, they know and understand that, you know, where the surplus lies, and reporting where the surplus lies in their business, and giving them that reporting, and then it's bringing those other people along on that journey, you know. So it's having really important partnerships, not only just with the food industry, but with funding partners, with retail partners, with food industry partners, and we have lots of great partners, you know. So you know, you have I suppose what we've seen here here is where we have people like the Tesco's, like the Coca-Cola, who really listen and understand what the problems and what the issues are. And they take us along, they support us, they look at, and they integrate that into the business. So, I mean, 5 years ago, you had nobody really talking about sustainability. Now every CEO is aligned to sustainability. They will understand it. They know where their metrics are. You have people like Tesco, whose leadership team, or even, you know, their I suppose their bonuses are linked to, you know, ESG and food waste targets and stuff like that. So it's been a major shift. And it's been fantastic how we've supported that growth.
And John, it has been a substantive shift. It's not like ESG as a tick box anymore. Like when I think back to the conversations we were having in business journalism 15 years ago, sustainability it might have been kind of out there as an outlier in the ether, but now it is very much, and as the Minister said, very, very much central and core in terms of financial accountability and transparency. But do you think the targets that have been set by industry are ambitious enough? Could they be even more ambitious? And what can government do to help them along on that?
Yeah, I think the whole thing is really exciting, to be honest with you. And when you mentioned there when you're a business journalist previously, like you see it now with business, they're following consumer trends where consumers now are far more conscientious of what they're buying and what the green credentials are around those products, and business and industry are reacting to that very clear consumer trend that people now want to buy. So whether that's people wanting to buy products, whether it's fruit, for example, that's not in plastic packaging, or whether you're trying to buy stuff with less plastic, stuff like that. So you can see that the consumer is trending that way. My sister is 22 years of age, and Ruth will absolutely research the green credentials of every product she is going to buy before she buys it. I'm 32. When I was 21, 22, that wasn't even talked about. So it's amazing how much, you've said in the last 5 years, society has shifted that way. In terms of government and what we're doing here, 35% is the sectoral targets. We have to be utterly ambitious. We really are. But I think 35% is an achievable target to reach before 2030. There's no point going out setting crazy targets that we're not going to be able to match. And what government are going to do is set the framework, be able to guide people along it, being able to provide proper grants, proper energy supports, to actually make sure that business achieves that target, because everyone wants to get to where we have to get to, and it's about making it as easy as possible. And one thing that I would say about, and I've been the climate action spokesperson for the last 2 years in the Senate, is it's about reframing the debate around climate action in this country. It's not a thing of, you need to do this because the world is on fire and mother knows best. It has to be about, hold on a second, everyone. There is massive opportunities here in this. There's massive opportunities for the economy, massive opportunities in green technology, massive opportunities for job creation. And once we reframe that debate a wee bit more, I think people get very, very excited about what we're
So
going
kind
to
of
do.
what's the mix in terms of carrot, stick and kind of encouragement, because they all have a role to play?
My thing is two things about this, right? I think the average Irish person in this country today, the average consumer, wants to really play their part, an individual part, for example, in the fight against climate change. And what we need to do as a government is two things. Make that as simplistic and as easy as possible for that person to engage in that, and also make it financially incentivized so that they're getting a little bit something back from it. And it was mentioned earlier by the Minister, one of the perfect examples of that is the deposit return scheme, where we are actually going to give you cash for your trash. People are going to want to go and put plastic bottles back in because A, they'll get a little bit of money back from it, B, they'll feel good about it. You know, it's a real tangible idea of what something is doing that's so simple to try and help. And recycling is actually the greatest thing that an individual themselves can do in the fight against climate change. So when we talk about carrots and sticks, I think it's two things: making it as simplistic as possible and as easy as possible for people to follow, and making it financially incentivized at the same time.
And I suppose that really brings us to the whole question. And just remind, particularly our virtual audience, please send in your questions, the toughest questions you can for our panel, because that's what they're here for, to answer these beautiful minds. I suppose that Suzanne really brings us into the whole question of consumer behaviour, because we know, and it's not just, we're all consumers, so it's each of us, but what we do individually and collectively is going to be key. What are you seeing through Food Cloud's business, that the change in behaviour, and what do you think is driving that?
Well, I guess, I mean, the first one, as I said, the food industry has taken it on board, CEOs have taken it on board, and now I guess it's starting to filter down. So when I say filter down, a lot of the strategic partnerships that we develop, we look at it and sort of go, okay, it needs to align to purpose, it needs to align to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we find that mutual ground where they can work with us on the programmatic or where they can work with us with surplus food. So I suppose then what happens there, how it filters down into consumers. The first thing, it filters down into employees. So you might do an employee engagement program, so employees start to really understand, actually, my company is serious. This is why it aligns to, this is how it educates us, and this is how it aligns to really driving this change. And then working with large retail brands, it's amazing because we can't actually go out to consumers and talk really about food waste. That's our
B2B.
business is B2B. So really having great partners in the retail space where they can take and they can amplify that message to their own consumers, that makes a huge difference to us. So that's the change that we're seeing, that everybody's getting on board, and those partnerships are really supporting and amplifying the message for us.
Yeah.
So that's the brilliant thing.
Kiva, look, I mean, obviously when it comes to public transport, getting us out of our private cars is going to be key, but I kind of feel sometimes it's one of those make us chaste, but not just yet, because people are maybe holding on to it, or perhaps they don't feel that the transport options are available, particularly if you're maybe in a rural area. So how are we going to create, in terms of like consumer behaviour, and you're creating campaigns to try and create that positive change and get that buy-in, how do you actually go about doing that and convincing people of the circular economy?
Well, I mean, as far as public transport is concerned, there is a bit of wait and see. You have to remove the physical barriers before you can remove the psychological barriers to that behavioural change. So we have to deliver that, a fully reliable, high quality, ubiquitous service in order to ensure that modal shift does happen, and that last mile also needs to be tackled, and that's where the role for other modes of micromobility come into play. So I think we do need to really, we have to deliver that fully integrated service across all types of transport services to really offer something that does get people out of cars and onto, not just out of public transport, but other forms of more sustainable modes of transport. So it is complex, and it does take planning, and it does take investment in the system, so to speak, to remove those.
Because I suppose that even just speaks to how we design our cities, how we design our living spaces. So how do you even just go about doing that? How do you go about creating that sort of a change? Is it tapping into that, as you say, it's a psychological and the emotional as much as the physical infrastructure?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, to a lot of, what has been said by the panelist, I think that we do need to change also the narrative around, climate and climate action, and, that sense of, terrifying the public. We need to actually show them the opportunities, but show them how they can play their role. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of scaremongering. We, as John said, we need to boil down the message to make it really clear, really simple, in the same way we did with COVID, that very clear behavioural change communications, that, we need to decide what that is and actually enable our population and the public to actually embrace that and actually make simple changes that all add up. And it's not about just, well, you have to buy your electric car, or you have to stop eating red meat, or whatever it is. It's just those small incremental changes. If we all do it together, then we tackle this together.
It is a tricky topic, isn't it, John, about how you communicate effectively around climate change, because a lot of the scaremongering and, of course, the challenge is so real, and there's justification for that, but that can be quite paralysing or even alienating for people. So what role does government have in creating those cultural, and I suppose it's the communications challenge of
Yeah, actually, that's a timely question, because obviously I sit on the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Climate Action. So for yesterday and last week, we had people in from the media talking about climate literacy in Ireland and about how well it's understood and how it's covered in the media, both either in traditional media, like RT and the Irish Times, for example, call and then also on social media. And what was very, very clear from the data that was presented to us, which I actually was surprised at, to be honest, is that there is a very coherent level of climate literacy right across all age sectors. So obviously people in the 16 to 30, 35 age group are, you know, the most clued into it. But I was really, really surprised to know that there is very high levels of climate literacy. And a lot of that is down to the communication, both either from government, but also through media. So for one example, right, what I'll give, I've been at the last 2 COPs in Glasgow and Egypt. And 3 weeks ago, we were in a room for a 10-hour debate with 180 other parliamentarians from around the world, people from Pakistan, people from island nations in the Pacific Ocean, where they're now relocating villages because the sea levels are rising so much. And one of the things you now see on media, and it's important, is when you look at, say, wildfires in California, or 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater at the minute, it's so important to link that back as to why that's happening. That's not something to be like, oh God, those poor people the other side of the world. That's happening as a direct result of the failure of governments around this world to lower global temperatures. That's happening as a direct result of climate action and climate change. And the one thing that was very clear to me at COP was these other parliamentarians said, oh, hold on a second, this is happening us, but if we don't all do something, it's coming for you next, because we're all going to be affected by this. So when you get that level of communication through, that this is what's happening in other parts of the world, and you can see it here in my hometown of Dundalk, there's been more flooding in the last 5 or 6 years than ever before. How much of an unseasonably warm November did we have, where we're all walking around in T-shirts only 3 or 4 weeks ago? So it's communication like that. It's providing real-life examples in Irish society. It's, again, it's like you said with COVID, it's about making it as simplistic as possible. And anyone in advertising will say it. It's repetition, 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 repetition. The more we hammer home the message and the necessity of doing things in our everyday lives to help with our climate targets and our climate goals, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Is that communications challenge itself challenged by the complexity of the just transition and the fact that some communities will be more affected than others?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, the whole thing about it is, as we make this transition towards a much more sustainable economy and a sustainable society, the just transition is so important. And that is why we can't leave anybody behind. And I'll just give you one clear example, and not to kind of, you know, beat the government drum, but I'll give you one clear example. When we're talking about retrofitting, we are going ahead and we are retrofitting every single social house in this country free of charge. So the most vulnerable people at the most risk of climate poverty are having really well-insulated, warm homes that are going to be a really good thing. Whereas at the same time then, we're providing very, very substantial grants backed up by long-term loans where people in other homes can also get the same thing. So that's just a good example of the just transition, how we're making sure that every sector of society is coming with us on what is going to be a really exciting journey. Like, we are absolutely changing everything about how this country works. It's something to be really
We might come back to
about.
it later, just on the question of the level of investment that can be that needs to be required. Louise, obviously legislation can be a huge driver of change, and I know you are very, very excited about the going back to the future, as a lot of things in sustainability and climate seems to be, going back to the future, whether it's recycling clothes or anything else. But going back to the Minister getting 10p, I wonder how much he got for all of his returned bottles. But the DRS scheme, Back to the Future, how much of a game changer do you think that is going to be when it's, I think, what is it, 2024 probably, when it becomes fully operational?
Look, I think it will be an absolute game changer in relation to the collection rates, you know, so, and I think that addresses a couple of different things. It addresses the pollution in the environment and the challenge around plastic pollution that, you know, we want to try and solve. I think because we know it's a very big incentive, as, you know, John mentioned, you know, it's going to be a big incentive for people to actually participate so that we're going to actually collect those bottles. But I think the other thing that it's going to do is that it's going to provide proper high-quality feedstock for recycling. And I think that is going to be a game changer in terms of enabling and recycling companies to invest into facilities in Ireland, because currently we don't have any bottle-to-bottle recycling facilities on the island of Ireland. We use recycled PET in our bottles. We have our Deep River Rock Water brand is 100% recycled PET. We have high rates of recycled content in our Coca-Cola products as well. But we have to bring that recycled PET in from outside of Ireland. We don't want to do that. We want to actually have a circular closed loop in Ireland where we're collecting very high rates, 90% plus of the materials that we place on the market, that we recycle them locally, and that we put those back into our bottles again. And that's a closed loop for packaging. We don't currently have that, but I think the DRS is going to be a real game changer and an enabler to.
And obviously you've seen it work successfully in other markets because you're right across Europe, but in the countries where you have seen it operate, how successful are those schemes?
The deposit return systems, extremely successful. You know, they're very consistent. And where we can implement the deposit system right and, you know, take the time to actually get all the infrastructure in place, design it in the right way, and put, you know, we mentioned earlier about the consumer and really putting the consumer in the heart of the design, because it needs to be easy for consumers to participate. They need to have collection points that are near to them. They need to have a deposit rate that is not too high, but is high enough to actually incentivize them to actually do what they need to do and return those packs. Where we can get all those pieces of the jigsaw in place, we can deliver more than 90%. So 9 in 10 bottles will actually come back to the system. That's very consistent across Europe.
And to what extent are consumers driving that? Like, you know, Coca-Cola customers actually driving that need for sustainability. We talked earlier about how alignments, you know, young people want to work in companies that align with their values, but to what extent are you seeing that push coming from up as well as the regulatory pushes that you're getting to?
No, there's definitely a change in consumer behaviour with more and more consumers, you know, kind of moving up the chain from, you know, those who are really not interested in sustainability to what we call eco-considerers, you know, eco-activists, which I think are like John's sister, you know, who will always, you know, do what it takes to be as sustainable as they possibly can. We're seeing that number of people increase over time. But it's the middle part, you know, people who want to be more sustainable, who actually are quite sustainable or, you know, climate literate, as we said earlier, that want to do the right thing, but sometimes feel a little bit paralysed, don't always have the tools in place. And, you know, I need to be reminded sometimes. So I think, you know, communication is really, really important. And I think that government has a role to play, you know, NGOs have a role to play, the media, but also I think brands have a role to play because, you know, we can talk to consumers and communicate to them in the way that we know that they will hear and they will listen. So,
and Suzanne, that's something that you picked up because obviously partnership is going to be absolutely key. And I suppose when you think of Food Cloud, partnership is its DNA, it's the essence of it. To what extent, because you are B2B and you're not getting to consumers, why do those partnerships matter with brands that can perhaps amplify a message you're trying to get out?
Yeah, well, for us, I mean, exactly what you're saying there, that creating lots of different types of partnerships that actually can move to consumers, that's exactly what we're looking for. With us, we, I suppose, for us, funding is freely available for doing trials, for starting off work and looking at innovative designs or innovative new product development and stuff like that. So we're always looking for fresh new partners that can help us not only just amplify the message to change consumer behaviour, but actually can just help us drive new innovation and new products. And we get so much funding that stops at, you know, that trial phase, and when we need to amplify it, that's where we're looking for really deep partners that actually can really help us, and it really makes sense when we can go.
It's a bit of a cliche when you kind of say partnerships are key. You would say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But particularly when you look at transport, because consumers alone, individual passengers, or even as a group, they can't be expected to be the drivers, for want of a better phrase, of that change themselves. So where does partnerships kind of come into that for you as part of maybe a more holistic system of driving change?
Yeah, actually, when we set out our sustainability strategy in 2020, we weren't sure of what the future looked like or how we would achieve our targets, but we were very clear that we needed to reach out and put partnerships at the core of us delivering on our strategy. So goal 17 of the SDGs is really central to what we're doing. And actually, we have a number of really interesting partnerships. partnerships at that holistic level. One is for GH2, it's Galway Green Hydrogen Hub, where we've come together with the energy sector and we as we integrate and we couple with the energy sector to figure out what, you know, a fully sustainable future would look like, particularly around hydrogen and transport. And we're a part of a consortium that is looking to develop Ireland's first green hydrogen hub in Galway. So that's one example of a partnership. Another would be, you know, data. It's all about understanding your data to make smart evidence-led decision-making. And so we are working with Microsoft to develop their cloud for sustainability to actually drive that. And that is something that, you know, will inform our decision-making. So we're working with, you know, best in class and reaching out and sharing and understanding what those issues would be. I just come back to, you know, something that we talked about around the just transition and say the Green Goal, the GH2 Hydrogen Hub, for example. That is something that is an opportunity. Again, we need to talk about the opportunities in the west of Ireland, which is, you know, a total disruptor in terms of various different modes of transport, and has the potential to offer new jobs and new positions and tap into the expertise within the local community. So I think, you know, and another aspect that we've found is that actually just in terms of partnerships, it's also about the partnerships within your business. So we have found that talking to those at the front line, those, in particular, in positions that wouldn't necessarily are not in the C-suite, but that they have the solutions to actually becoming more sustainable, and we need to tap into that.
It's a lot of conversations, a lot of talk. Louise, it's time to make it easy for the consumer just to go and give their bottle or their can and get it back. That's going to require, presumably, the activation of a lot of partnerships, because there are so many people involved in that life cycle and in the value chain. And if the discussions on Liveline or anything to go by, it's going to be everything. It's going to be retailers. It's going to be such a broad group of people, and particularly us from the north, because I don't know, is there a chance of us getting more money if we bring ours across? I'm only joking. But there's that all-island dimension, of course, because your operations are across the island.
Absolutely, and I think the partnership with retailers to ensure that, you know, we have the collection points, because they'll be responsible for actually helping to, you know, accept back the packaging and give people back their deposits. So, you know, we've been working very, very closely with retailers on that, and that is absolutely vital. But you mentioned a very important aspect here is that small issue of the border, and the fact that we do actually have in Ireland an all-island supply chain. In fact, for Coca-Cola, our production facility is in Lisburn in Northern Ireland, and we actually supply the entire island from that facility. So, for us, this is a very big logistical challenge around how do we look at, having systems of deposit return systems north and south of the border, ultimately, that are interoperable somehow. And that's a very big political challenge. We've been having a lot of negotiations. I see Tom here, who works together with myself in Coca-Cola HBC, has been leading a lot of the discussions on that front, and we really are trying to push the Northern Ireland Executive to try and move on. I know it's very difficult at the moment, but to try and move on this topic that we've been talking about for a long, long time. In fact, we saw the debate happening about DRS in Northern Ireland, where we thought that the deposit return system was going to actually be established a long time ago. And in the Republic of Ireland, we have completely overtaken that. And I actually believe that the way government has moved to legislate, the way industry has actually come together in partnership, we have actually done a very accelerated timeline versus a lot of different countries that I see across Europe who are also exploring DRS. But I think
it's a fresh business opportunity for John and I here in Uri and Dundalk.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Get working.
I love it.
Yeah.
Get working on a little partnership of our own. But John, it is. If you do want industry to be more ambitious and to do these kind of things, the government is also going to have to be key in not just as a partner, but in facilitating those partnerships.
Yeah, and exactly. So it's about providing a proper framework. So, for example, with the Climate Action Plan, the whole concept of the Climate Action Plan is to provide a plan and to be able to show people exactly how they can do it. So, for example, Minister Cleary mentioned earlier how businesses will be able to avail of a dedicated toolkit that will measure all of the carbon output that you're putting and then show you exactly how to reduce it. So there's just a key example of what government is doing there. I could keep going, but I'm conscious.
No, do keep going. I'm just actually going. It's great because I've lots of questions coming in from our virtual audience as well. So I'm just starting to pre-select those. But but it is that notion of. It isn't just that you're a partner, you're going to have to facilitate all of that. And it comes to a question that I know that will be of interest to Kiva as well, is that the scale of investment required is huge.
Absolutely massive. It really is. But I think one element of it, it's not just about the scale of investment, it's where, and it's that integrated, cross-sectoral approach that really, will be the key enabler to the green transition. So like that for us, it's not just about transport, it's working with transport and energy and how they knit together.
So for example, what does waste look like in terms of a circular economy for a company like CIE?
Yeah, so I mean, we have ambitious targets to say reduce our waste by 25% and increase our recycling by up to 75% in across our group by 2030. And so what we're doing, there's one of the key areas that we're focusing in on is water, actually. And so we have, if you think Dublin Bus, for example, 900 buses washed every night for the whole of the year, and using over 75 million litres of water per annum. We're doing a trial in one of our depots in Summerhill, which uses 6 million litres of water per annum and putting in a rainwater harvesting scheme, which will actually reduce the need for water by 50%. Now, that's just one depot, and if you can roll that out and then roll it out to Vale, that's massive. But we have various different other initiatives around waste, and including we have been trialling reverse vending machines in Balserin in 2 locations, where we have where those machines that have been used. There's great return from them, and 3 million passengers pass those machines in every year. So we have a number of different initiatives, but actually the key to understanding how we reduce waste is the data, actually, and that it's a little bit more complex than
it's hard to even imagine that rainwater harvesting at Summerhill. Before I go to the questions, I want to, just because John was over at COP, and I want to maybe just ask you, Louise and Suzanne, look, I mean, there can be a scepticism trespassing on cynicism when it comes to complex, global efforts such as COP and all of its various iterations. But Louise, I might ask you, does it have an impact? And obviously Coca-Cola attends and has a profile there. Does it affect the business? Do those things cascade down in any kind of real meaningful way?
Sorry, I don't really...
the COP27, so these are big, global diplomatic challenges, and sometimes in the public there can be a scepticism about it, but do they matter? Do they cascade down what's happening at that big international diplomatic level?
Well, no, absolutely. And, we've been attending COP since 2009. We've gone and we've engaged, and our purpose of going there is to actually really to listen and to learn and to engage in conversations. And, look, we did, and I'm sure people will have, seen some of the media coverage, we did get criticised for our involvement in COP this year in particular, above, the other years that we have participated. And, we listened to that, we listened to the feedback and the criticism, and and we learn from it, But for us, we still think it's important to actually be there, to be part of the dialogue, and to actually learn. I was in Sharm el Sheikh last month at COP as well, and the people who you meet, the connections that you make, the ideas that you actually get. The innovation zone in COP was really inspiring, and we actually came away with a couple of really solid ideas that we're now looking at to say, look, how can this feed into our journey journey towards net zero, because we have our own net zero pathway that's been established, but we don't have all the solutions. And the only way that you're going to be able to identify some of those solutions is to be able to be out there and partnering with people. So we think it's important to be still there.
Suzanne, I recently interviewed this wonderful young Irish activist who went to her first COP as an activist, but the second as a young member of the Irish delegation that went, and her mind was blown open just by the scale of what happens there. Do those big conversations matter? Do you know, is it filtering down to companies like Food Clyde?
Well, is it filtering down? Well, this year, not quite so much, because really it was all about the recovery funds for this year. So whilst we have sustainability at the heart, it wasn't really this year that there were many plans that actually looked at companies on the ground and what we would do. So for us this year, it's the same as it was more the big voice and the resolution around the funds for international. So that's where it sort of landed with us this year. I mean, our conversation is still going on, around sustainability. But
and John, you were there. There's lots of questions coming from online, virtually, about COP and actually about the Convention on the Biological Diversity COP, which has just kicked off in Montreal. John, I'll put this to you. There's a new report from the EPA today. This is one of our attendees said, which has revealed that waste levels are increasing rather than decreasing. Does this not undermine efforts to increase recycling rates and create a true circular economy?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're trying to do, I'm a big believer in, bit of a cliche, but if you build it, they'll come. So what I mean by that is, if you're able to put proper infrastructure in place, whether that's greater connectivity when it comes to transport, whether it's the deposit return scheme, if you make it, as again, I've beat the same drum, as simplistic and as easy as possible for it to engage, those rates, that person asking that question, those rates are going to drop instantly. And you can see it already, because the deposit return scheme is in 40 different jurisdictions. It's in 12 different European countries. And we are absolutely going to hit our targets of 77% by 2027 and 90% by 2029. And that's there's 1.9 billion plastic bottles produced in this country every year. So I accept what the question is saying. I think the person is quite right. But we are only at the very beginning of this journey. And with the infrastructure that we're introducing as a government, that is going to drop dramatically.
And one for you, Louise, just following on from that, another attendee says, to what extent is industry concerned about divergence across DRS schemes, both inside and outside of, the EU, saying that, will we need unique labels and unique barcodes? It's a big logistical challenge.
It is a massive logistical challenge, and that's exactly what we were talking about earlier with the north-south issue, because there is, if you don't have country-specific barcodes and anti-fraud prevention measures, there is a risk that people will just start to bring in, either on an individual level, but also potential on a wider level, bring in packs that haven't actually had the deposit paid on them and redeem the deposit, and that's actually got potential to be able to break the system. So you need to have, and we know this from, in mainland Europe, there's a lot of countries that have, border areas where people go across the border, much like they do here. And we have learnings that we're able to take from that. So you need to have anti-fraud prevention measures. And in many cases, you will need to have national barcodes. That creates issues for suppliers like us, to try and, figure out how we can manage our supply chain in a, the right way. But, we have to try and balance both sides of things and make sure that the system is not open to fraud.
I don't know if there might be some questions for those of you in the room. There is a roving mic. I think our colleagues here have a roving mic. So if there's any questions, just put up your hand and let me know. And then I might just go back to another couple of questions all related. Suzanne just saying, do we need to be more ambitious to reach targets? Does industry need to be more ambitious to reach those targets? Is it difficult to really accelerate those commitments?
Well, I think it's back to Caoimhe's point, it's all about the data. So, the more we know and understand what's there, the more people are going to come on board, the more companies and stuff are going to come on board. So looking at measuring scope 3, so that's a really important piece. That's a piece of work that we're doing at the moment, to just know and understand where those emissions lie and how we can reduce them. So the data is the most important piece, that actually everybody gets an understanding and then can set those right targets. Do we need to be more ambitious? Of course we do. Of course we need to be more ambitious. Everybody needs to come on board and amplify that message and actually, bring partners on board and stuff like that. Yeah.
You know, the Minister, John, mentioned something earlier just about, you know, this is the global defining challenge, but things get in the way. You know, we've been in a state, I think, did the word perma-crisis enter into the dictionaries kind of in recent years, but, you know, whether it's been Brexit, whether it's been COVID, you know, the cost of living crisis, there always seems to be something that seems to get in the way of that. So how are we going to speed up the change for ourselves, even as a state, to reach those 2030 goals?
I think two things. So I've been a member of the Senate for the last 2 years, which has been two of the craziest years in kind of world history, to put it bluntly. And I have seen amazing how legislation can come right through within 24 hours or whatever like that, that really big decisions can be made as a result of the COVID crisis.
It's not always a good thing, but yes.
COVID is an example of that, right? So if we take the same urgency and the same level of determination that was needed in a legislative aspect and a government aspect to deal with the COVID crisis, and then apply that to the climate crisis, I think that is a really good example of how government can speed up on that. The second thing is now escaped my mind. I was going.
But when you're doing that on like what Kiva mentioned earlier, it's not just taking a single measure or set of measures. This is a whole of government, whole of society thing. It's an epic thing. You can't just do that overnight in your office.
And it's like, this is the thing about it. It's a huge multifaceted approach towards reaching our climate targets. I know we're discussing here naturally enough a lot about industry, a lot about consumers, stuff like that. But I have a real belief, like I'm certain by 2030, Ireland is going to be the renewable energy powerhouse of the European Union, without a doubt. Like when you talked about the west coast of Ireland, what we're going to do with wind energy, we're going to be a net exporter of wind energy by the decade, selling that off to other European countries who are landlocked, for example. So there is huge opportunity for this country. I am very confident in where we're going to be in 7 and 8 years' time as that renewable energy powerhouse. There's going to look, and the final thing about it is this is happening. And we can either get on the train and get there and be world and European leaders in it, or we can be laggards who'll be in 10 or 15 years' time say to ourselves, do you know what, guys, maybe we should have pushed a bit harder. So, yeah. Okay,
see, are there any questions just from the floor or from the room at all? Let me see if there's any hands up. Yes, there's just at the back here, this lady. Thanks.
Hi, Roisin Kelly. Thanks, everyone, and great to hear all of your observations on what you're doing, and it's great to see so much integrated activity across all the groups. For the Senator, it was obviously probably very exciting to go to 2 COP sessions, most recently in Egypt. Are there any companies, countries, cities that you saw where you were really impressed by the way that they'd managed to leapfrog and really accelerate things, and anything we could maybe learn from that?
Yeah, so actually one of the benefits I had when I went there's a thing called the IPU, which is the International Parliamentary Union. So when I went there on the Sunday, we had a 10-hour debate with 181 parliamentarians from around the world. And I had the opportunity to meet people from different countries who are doing exactly that. So, for example, some of my, I met a really impressive Green MP, 26 years of age, from Luxembourg. They introduced a really fantastic retrofit program 2 or 3 years ago, and have been really excelling on that. And then you look at it here in Ireland, we've only introduced it in the last year, and we're slow to start off with it. So I found what I personally got from COP was to be able to meet other parliamentarians from other political parties of all political persuasions and none, left, centre and right. And I really found that an interesting way to do it. And there was a couple of things that you can certainly take home, you can raise in the Oireachtas or you can raise in your Climate Action Committee. But this is kind of, this discussion here on a microcosm level is a good example of that. It's about bringing stakeholders and bringing people together to learn best practice from each other. And once we do that, and I think once we do that, we're very much on the right track towards it.
Can I ask, and I'll take 1 or 2 more questions, but just listening there, just what do you think for each of you are the biggest challenges that remain either within your sector or looking at that kind of cross-sectoral thing? And I might start with you, Suzanne, because Food Cloud is on just an interesting part of its own journey at the moment in terms of how it's now developing.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I suppose it's we know that there'll probably be a limited, at the moment for our food distribution is through charities, to 700 charities in Ireland. So there's a restriction and there's a limitation in how much those could take. So it's looking and understanding what more we can do with food. So looking at innovation, so looking at what else can we do. So for us, it's about distributing as much food as possible. So how can we do that? Through innovation and through working with around advocacy and activism to understand and make sure that that we're all singing on the same hymn sheet, that we're influencing policy and we're changing what needs to be done. And I suppose then for us as well, it's just taking our technology and amplifying that and bringing it to new markets. So what are the cost savings there with working with technology in new markets? So we're working into trials in Africa and stuff like that. So it's still just doing more innovation, bringing it to a wider audience, and then making sure that that we bring everybody along on that journey.
And obviously no individual or no organisation has been untouched by the cost of living crisis, but particularly because you're trying to get food out to those who need it most. Is that impacting on your model at the moment?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, during COVID, we saw a 77% increase in demand. And we thought, that was, 2020 and that, it would level out. But actually, it hasn't leveled out. It's grown. And so part of that is, where you have issues with supply chain, you have issues with cost of living crisis and all sorts of things like that. So it has increased our costs significantly. And part of that is, well, actually, how do we keep servicing those? How do we keep servicing? So funding is always a concern for us and building those new partners that know and understand the deepness of it all. That it's not just surplus food that's important. It's really understanding that bigger impact, how we can support and how it can help.
And Kiva, what about for CIE? Like, I know you've spoken a lot about the need for that holistic kind of system-wide and systems speaking to each other. Again, they're very, very big macro things. So what do you think are the biggest challenges or maybe the obstacles still that are there for you?
Yeah, I mean, for us, that's exactly it. We our sector is integrating with energy, and we're pivoting from a fossil fuel-based system to a one that is essentially electrified. So we need to implement our infrastructure and become and have access to energy and electrification and the grid. So, almost like the full electrification, and albeit with hydrogen as well, access to that alternative low emissions fuel in electricity means putting in place significant. Our demands need to be met by the energy sector and also by the grid. That's a massive challenge. At the same time that there's the heat pumps are being delivered across the board, etc., and the needs of industry. So that's a real risk and challenge for us to deliver that. Also, if you think about how our public transport system was designed, almost 100 years old. Now, having a zero emissions transport fleet doesn't fit within the realms of city centre heritage sites, so to speak. We now need to redesign those and actually perhaps remodel them and change them. So it's that complex kind of systems thinking really that we need to figure out. Yeah.
And for you, Louise, is it cultural, is it infrastructural, is it regulatory? When you look sort of across all of the challenges, I mean, what if you had a magic wand for today, what would be the kind of the biggest thing you'd like to biggest obstacle out of your way?
Well, when we look at, I suppose, our wider climate agenda, not just around the packaging collection, that's a big part of it, but, we have a much, bigger climate agenda. We have this target to deliver net zero emissions by 2040. And when we look across all the different scopes of our emissions, actually the biggest chunk of our emissions is in scope 3, which means that we have to work with an enormous amount. I mean, when you consider the amount of suppliers that we have across our value chain, it is absolutely enormous. And some of them are, depending on a lot of the large suppliers, are kind of there with us already, you know, and they have their own agendas around emissions reductions and, you know, maybe have their own net zero targets and science-based targets. But a lot of them don't, you know. We work with a lot of actually quite small SME suppliers that need to, you know, for us to succeed, you know, we need them to actually be on the same pathway as us, and trying to help bring those along the journey. That's actually quite a challenge because of the scale, you know, the amount of suppliers that we have to bring along with us. But, you know, that for me, I think is the challenge. And also, you know, back to measurement, we don't necessarily have the right measurements and the right tools to measure every part of the entire value chain. You look at biodiversity, for example, you know, that's an area where we don't actually have approved science-based targets yet, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to look at pushing ourselves on this agenda.
And indeed, one of our questions from our virtual audience, John, was around that in particular, about how do we have a nature-positive economy as well as, you know, the circular economy. Can I just ask you just, you know, John, on the challenges, because Louise makes a good point, like it might be okay for the big publicly listed companies or well-financed companies it's easier perhaps for them to go on the sustainability agenda because they've maybe access to funds or investment, or perhaps regulators rather putting pressure. But even for a lot of small businesses, perhaps they're worried that they don't have the capacity to go on this journey that they know they have to go on.
Yeah, exactly. So I touched on it earlier, but the toolkit there that I mentioned earlier would be a really good example of something that can help small businesses. I also think Chamber of Commerce's, actually localised Chamber of Commerce's, would have a big role to play when it comes to SMEs and being able to help them through that process. You also see as well with local authorities in the last 2 or 3 years that local authorities now have dedicated climate action SPCs, dedicated climate officers, and they'll play a role in local communities and with local business too. So it's kind of like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. Like, no offense to CIA or Coca-Cola, but it's all well and good for like the really big corporations who have the funding and the ability to do that, and that's great, and that's your responsibility that we're going to do. But then it's also important then for government, local authorities, stakeholders, civic society.
Well, it does matter for bigger companies because their shareholders and others are telling them that their supply chains have to be fully, it goes right down the line.
And we're all interconnected, whether it's a small business selling coffee in an independent shop to something like tea or Coca-Cola. We are all exist in the one food chain, and it's about making it as sustainable and as practical for everyone as possible.
I don't know if there's, but you might have time for one more question from the floor, if I can. This gentleman here, thanks a million.
Yeah, sorry. Paddy Arnold's my name. There's obviously thanks very much to Coca-Cola and the IIEA for a great forum for honest conversation. Everyone obviously knows the phrase reduce, reuse, recycle. There's some good talk about recycling, but is it not that kind of putting in incentives or I suppose nudges to society to reduce is probably even a greater first step, and then secondly going towards reusing rather than even plastic, which obviously a lot of plastic, whether it's hard to fully recycle it, when something like the Minister talked about going back to the future, when something like glass is completely reusable and completely recyclable. So yeah, what aspects are there from business but also from government to, I suppose, push those reduce and reuse rather than just recycle?
John, I think that was for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I felt I was doing so well until that question came along. But
this is why we have audience participation.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's a hard one, actually, because like on one level, I guess from what you're asking is what can we do to ask people to reduce consumption more? Like, so, you know, Jesus, I'd be killed for saying this, like, but in some aspects, maybe that's people deciding not to eat meat, you know what I mean? And making a dedicated dietary change to say, do you know what, I'm going to be vegetarian, I'm going to be vegan. Like, there's one example of... Yeah.
Why not? Just to take the example of Coca-Cola, and this certainly mightn't go down well, but is there not a social incentive to say, hang on, let's promote the consumption of carbonated water rather than Coca-Cola, which is a sugary product which is probably not very good for the overall nutrition, rather than, just putting it out there, why don't we have carbonated...
I think what your question relates is to perhaps maybe a broader public health issues and initiatives too. So it is perhaps Minister...
Do you know what I might say about that, though, is it kind of went back to the point that I said at the very start. So take carbonated water. And again, not to be putting anything in Coca-Cola's mind as such, right? But we have seen now how companies and businesses are reacting to consumer trends and then trying to provide products there. So there's nothing to say that in the next X amount of years, you could have big corporations like Coca-Cola saying, do you know what, we are going to introduce a new product like
But
carbonated
you've
water
already
in
done
our
that,
brand
Louise.
style.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we produce water, so we
Yeah.
produce carbonated
Yeah.
water and still water. But look, I get your point, you know, and I think when we look at it, I'll kind of bring it back to the context of packaging because, you know, that's the area that I work in. But I think your point around reduce and reuse, you know, it's not something we talked about a lot today. We focused on recycling. That doesn't mean that we're not looking at, you know, strategies to reduce and to reuse, you know. So last week we also, and government is working on this as well, because last week we saw the new packaging waste regulation draft published, and in that there are reduction targets for packaging. So there are legal targets now coming in. That means that companies, not just beverage companies, but all companies are going to actually have to demonstrate how they reduce the amount of packaging that they use. There's very wide-reaching measures in that regulation. And on the reuse end of things, in Ireland, you know, we talk about going back to the future, you know, so we used to have refillable packaging, as we would call it, you know, where you gave your bottle back to the producer refilled it and sent it back out into the market. And we moved away from that as an industry, not just Coca-Cola. We were actually one of the last ones to, you know,
But they're coming
change.
back. They're on vogue.
But they are coming back.
Yeah.
Not in Ireland yet, but you know there is now legal targets for reuse that all countries are going to need to meet. So we're going to need to bring these solutions back, and I think that will be part of the agenda.
And that is part of, Kate, isn't it, the broader debate, because it isn't even just for us to use our cars less or even to change over to EVs. It's just like even use them less. It's all about just sort of, I suppose, changing our behaviour. It's a much, much bigger conversation.
It is, but also, you know, the whole ownership model also is changing as well, and is internationally, and I think that's an opportunity as well. So, you know, it has to be a flexible, dynamic model as well, you know, to feed everybody, to meet everybody's needs, but particularly the younger generation don't necessarily want to own a car, and you know, car sharing schemes, etc., etc. That is all, you know, the future. So it's having the solution to meet, you know, the different customer segments as well.
And those dynamics are changing. Before we finish up, I just wanted, because it is Christmas and it is festive, and I wanted maybe just to finish on what you're most optimistic about at this kind of pivotal time for sustainability and climate. For you, directing all the development at Food Cloud, Suzanne, what are you seeing on the ground that kind of gives you most hope?
I mean, personally, I'm passionate about the technology, because that is virtual food banks, and it'll do amazing work in places like Africa and stuff like that, where there is surplus food and they just can't get access to it, or the cost is really high. So actually going out into the market and using the technology. And in Ireland, we're doing two great projects. We're doing a new, I don't know if anybody's seen, but we're doing a lovely food truck. So these food trucks is part of a trial on a new food kitchen. So those food trucks are actually doing surplus food cooking with some of the excess that we have. And it's been really successful just going out to the market with those sort of things. And then there's a bigger piece that looks at surplus food in kitchens that we're going to do. So those kitchens will be cooking for charities, and that's free food, and they're in hotels and stuff like that. So we've always got lots of lovely innovation projects, but it's just bringing loads of great people on board with us as well, great partners on board. And for us, it's all about the partnership. So that's the exciting thing.
And for you, Kiva, what, because you say we're sort of back to pre-pandemic levels, so what, as you're doing all of that future planning and all the complexities of population, national development plan, what are you kind of most optimistic about? Or
well, I'm really optimistic about the fact that actually there's never been a more, a time where we have collaborated and shared as much, you know, cross industry, cross, sector, everybody who we work with is committed and wants to, work together to solve the problem and the issue. So I think that's really exciting. It's a really exciting time. It's a real time for innovation. Also really excited about the fact that, within Ireland, we have the potential to create the hydrogen economy, which is something which is fully circular and also it meets a need in really hard to carbonise areas such as heavy duty transport, long distance transport, haulage, etc. That's something that we can create, that we can own, and an indigenous industry, and we have it within our gift to develop it.
And obviously, DRS, Louise, is going to be a game changer. But even beyond that, what is on the horizon, I suppose, that is that you're kind of excited about in terms of the moment we're in?
Well, I guess it's connected to the DRS because, when we think about the EPA report that's out today that talks about the level of waste that we're producing, I think the DRS is going to be a key enabler to help address that. But I do remember speaking a number of years ago to Minister Ryan, because I think DRS was always his passion point for many years. And I remember speaking to him and, one of the things he said really stuck and resonated with me, because he said, look, the DRS is not just about addressing packaging. He said it's going to actually change consumers' mindset because it's going to get them to start thinking differently, So, and I think I really go back to that comment because I think now that we see DRS as a reality, I think it's not just going to address the issue of bottles and cans that people will have to recycle. I think it's going to actually help change people's mindset around waste and actually our responsibility to help reduce that. And back to the topic of, how do we reduce, how do we reuse? I think it's going to be a mindset shift for consumers.
And how are we finally, John, just going to get that by 2030 and beyond?
So I know everyone's really excited to get to work, so I'll be very brief. What I would say, two things, and what I'm excited about in particular. I said it earlier, by the end of the decade, we are going to be the powerhouse of renewable energy of the European Union. We're going to be the envy of other countries in the European Union. And the second thing I'm really excited about is jobs, jobs, jobs. The amount of opportunities for the Irish economy from the green agenda that's going to come now in the next 7 or 8 years, things we may not even know about, and how fast-paced moving that environment is. There's a lot to be really excited for when we think about what's going to happen in this country in terms of renewable energy and the jobs it's going to create in the next 7 to 8 years.
Well, we hoped for an honest and robust conversation. I think we got one. Thank you to the beautiful minds that joined me today, to Suzanne, to Louise, to Kiva and to John. I hope that you were stimulated by today's event as much as we are, as we consider how we're going to meet all of those big sustainability. To Agnese, thank you. To Dave and all the team at the IIEA and to all the Coca-Cola Ireland team, thank you very much. And finally, thanks to everyone as well. I didn't get through to all of your questions who joined us virtually, but as well as in person. Thank you very much. Have a lovely holiday season and Gurmaigat. Thank you.